for your question about the differences between arguments that you found on page 23 in your textbook. So go ahead and open your textbook to page 23, and we'll take a look at that column that you attached in the image that you provided. So if you take a look at the first one, you're affirming the antecedent. Now remember, the antecedent is the first part, the if P part, and the consequent is the second part, the part that would be then Q. So if you take a look at the structure of that first one, affirming the antecedent, you'll notice that P is on the second line in the textbook. So you're affirming or saying yes to P. And then your conclusion is Q. But if you take a look at the invalid argument form, you're affirming the consequent. So you'll notice on the second line, you have a Q, and then you're affirming the P, or your conclusion is the P. So that's the subtle difference between those two argument forms. One is valid and the other is invalid. So if you take a look at the examples given, if Spot barks, that is P. A burglar is in the house, that is Q. So Spot is barking would be P, and our conclusion would be Q. Therefore, a burglar is in the house. And so you can see that those premises and conclusion, the conclusion goes together and will always be valid in that form. But if you look right below that at the invalid form, we are taking that opposite. You're not seeing the P there on the second line, and you're not seeing the Q in the conclusion. Instead, it's the other way around. So in the example, if the cat is on the mat, that still refers to P, that's your antecedent. She is asleep, that's your consequent, that's Q. So your second line is going to refer back to the she is asleep in the first line, which is Q, she is asleep. And then the conclusion refers back to P, therefore she is on the mat. So that form is always going to be invalid. So that's the subtle difference between the valid and the invalid form. And it's the same for the second side on the page here. Holding it up. Denying the consequent and denying the antecedent. So the difference in those, they follow a similar structure, but you'll notice that the word not is in there. So if you take a look at denying the consequent, we're looking at if P then Q, not Q, therefore not P. So if you look at denying the antecedent, you'll notice in the second line it says not P rather than not Q, as it did in our modus tollens example. So those are the differences there. So in your first line, it's exactly the same, if P then Q. But your second line, if it's a not Q, then this argument form is going to be valid. If it's a not P, then that argument form is not going to be valid. And then for the first one, the modus tollens, you'll have in the conclusion not P that refers us back up to the antecedent. That will be valid. But you'll see in the denying the antecedent, it'll say therefore not Q. So that will be invalid. So if you take a look at the examples in the book, the first one, if Spot barks, that refers to the P. A burglar is in the house, that refers to the Q. So you'll notice then the next line, the not Q, would be a burglar is not in the house. So you're taking that a burglar is in the house and you're converting it to a burglar not being in the house. That not is what makes this modus tollens instead of the modus tollens, because we're denying it instead of it. being not denied. So it's that word not that you're going to be focusing on. So then the conclusion, therefore Spot is not barking, refers back to P. But if you take a look then below at denying the antecedent, you're going to see if the cat is on the mat, right, that refers to P. She is asleep, that refers to Q. Now we're going to go to not P, the cat is not on the mat, right? And then the conclusion would be she is not asleep. And so you can tell by that argument, both in form and if you just use your reasoning, that she could be somewhere else in the house sleeping. It doesn't have anything to do with the mat. So this is a way of determining whether arguments are valid or invalid just based on their form. We're used to looking at arguments that are valid or invalid based on their content. And so we tend to look at the content to determine whether or not we think something is true or false. But here we're looking at the form instead, which is why we can convert the sentences into variables using things like P and Q. So hopefully that explains that section a little bit better and is more clear. Please let me know if you have any more questions. Thanks.